missing someone.
Hey, this is Baundiesel, and I'm bringing you a video today talking a little bit about the Division 1, some issues on the PvE side of the game, and how I hope and think that they will be alleviated or addressed in the Division 2. The first thing I'll jump right into is the AI. I think when we all started playing the first game, the Rioters, pretty simple, easy to kill. Rikers, Cleaners, Rikers were just tough. Cleaners were just fun to kill, to be totally honest, at least in my opinion. But the LMB were the first ones that we went against where it seemed like they had some flanking tactics. They were, in theory, communicating, and they're the ones who I think brought the first challenge. And then when you had situations where you're fighting against first wave agents, they moved a certain way. They were a little more advanced, a lot more powerful. Moving on to things like the Hunters, and especially the Legendary missions, where we got this much more beefy, both in hit points and in strategy and movement AI. In the Division 2, I want to see more of what we kind of saw from the LMB. What we saw in the demo were these true sons moving around somewhat erratically, strategically, flanking heavily, trying to get around you, get behind you, use their various tools and weapons, the foam, for instance, to immobilize you, to allow them to get more movement around you and surround you. It looks good, and if the True Sons are a lower tier faction like I think they're going to be, I'm really excited to see how the higher tier factions are going to be. The Legendary AI is something that was really cool, and it was an advancement. But I believe there was some talk about how the Legendary AI was very, very taxing on the servers, and because they were doing so many high level computations and stuff like that. So more of that I'd really like to see. The big thing I would like to see are interesting mechanics rather than just tanky enemies. A good example from fairly early in the game was the Legendary for Times Square. With Wilbur, you had to pop his ammo pack before you could do any significant damage to him, except for the turret. The thing with that was that there was an air of mystery at the very beginning. People didn't understand why they couldn't kill him until they popped that bag, but it gave more to him than just pump him full until he's dead. A really good example of this was the Hunters. The Hunters in survival and even in the underground, their hit points really aren't that great. You can kill them fairly easily if you outplay them, but due to their mobility, their own skills, and the way that they fight, they're still challenging, at least for some people. The worst example, in my personal opinion, are also the Hunters, and specifically in the Legendary missions. I get why they added them. They're cool. If you've listened to the other videos, you've probably heard me rant about them before. They're just kind of a bad example of how to make the end of a fight interesting, to give us a Hunter fighting with the LMB for some reason that has like 50 billion hit points. And so even if you do outplay them, you don't kill them. You take an armor bar away, even if all 4 people are unloading into them. You see this in the Resistance as well, but that doesn't bother me as much because I think of Resistance as like an arcade mode on the side. But the Legendary missions, I would really like if maybe there was a Hunter introduced with, instead of it just having a billion hit points, it had like a stealth mechanic, or it had some kind of new skill or something different, some kind of mechanic that was interesting rather than just an infinite amount of hit points. Weak points. That's my last point here. Is there's some really cool things, like I mentioned Wilbur. All of the Cleaners are such a blast to kill. That and what we saw in the Division 2 preview, the beta, or not even the beta, the demo, it seems like almost every enemy has a hit point, and I think that's awesome. I can't wait to see what the heavy versions of the other factions are going to look like, and even more True Sons heavies if the grenade launcher isn't the only one. The next part is mission activity and variety. So I'm going to go through a bunch of the parts of PvE and talk about how I would like to see them changed up. First is just missions in general. I want to see variants when replaying missions, and maybe even different ways to complete the mission objective. Whether it's, say Lexington, for example. Yeah, sure, you can kill Lorraine when she comes down after you kill everyone else, but maybe there's a different way you can kill her. Maybe you can, focus fire a certain thing or a weak point that causes, something to collapse or something to explode that kills her that way. It might be just as challenging as just mowing down everyone, but it would also require some maybe more coordination or something like that. The variance in like enemy spawns and stuff like that as well. There is something nice when you're speed running and things like that about knowing where every enemy is going to come from. But it'd be really nice if you run the same mission 4 times if that mission plays out differently every time. Now, to some point, you can still get kind of used to it. You can still say, well, they're probably going to come from here, and you can prepare for that, but it at least makes you think. And I think the more we have to think in the Division 2, the better. The next thing is Incursions. The Incursions have their moments. Dragon's Nest with the hitting the 2 buttons at the same time that requires coordination. Stolen Signal with the various mechanics it has. But then other ones like Falcon's Lost there is coordination there, but that one, I just don't want the Incursions, if we have them in Division 2, to feel like a slog. Falcon's Lost feels like a slog. There is some fun to be had from it, but for the most part, you're sitting there at like wave 9 or 10, and you're just kind of thinking like, oh my god, is this over yet? And I really think we should do as much as we can to discourage that. On top of that, no hand holding. I would like if Incursions maybe even had different objectives, different times you play it, and for it not to be so obvious. In most of the Incursions into the Division 1, we were kind of handheld a lot. The GPS showed us where to go. They would passively tell us what we needed to do. The idea of having to figure it out on our own, even if it's only the first 1 or 2 times we play through it, that's still a fun feeling. It's a good feeling. HVTs are another one. I actually still love the HVTs because they're almost varied, but they do play out basically the same. But it's just fun to mow them down. More locations. I get that there's probably a good reason why they're fairly limited in Division 1, but there's so many cool locations around, even the Division 1 map, that these could have been done. And really basically everywhere where there was a side mission at the beginning of the game. Give us some lore behind them. There is a little bit of that now. I'm sure most people don't even look anymore, but when you accept an HVT, there's actually a little story there. But maybe, push that a little bit further. Give us a little more, than that. And the last thing is it's a good place for some specialized rewards. There's a lot of talk in the community about hiding certain gear or cosmetics behind certain activities. HVTs wouldn't be a bad thing to hide some maybe like mid-level gear or something behind, because they could be challenging but not impossible for the average person, which would let the raids and the Incursions be stuff for the more advanced players. Speaking of raids, give us tons of mechanics in the raids. I really, really don't want the raids to just be going in there and mowing down a billion enemies. And I don't think they will be. They're pushing the raids hard. They seem really confident about them. And this is where the hand-holding again. Zero hand-holding. I honestly hope we don't know anything about the raids when the game comes out and when they're released, when we can start doing them. And I hope that we have zero hints on how to complete them. I hope that there's a big open space and we have to figure it out while we're also killing mobs of enemies or doing whatever it is. Hell, throw in a time limit. Give us something. But definitely, definitely, definitely do not hold our hands in that situation. Give us exclusive rewards. That is a place where I think you don't want to make it, impossible for anyone to get everything, but it should be a challenge. There should be a grind, and there should be incentive to do the hardest stuff that requires the most coordination, that requires the most work and skill. It's okay to hide some really, really cool stuff behind the raid, be it cosmetics, special gear you can only get there. There's tons of things that you can do with it. And Worlds First, that would be amazing. It seems like a lot of the team agrees when people have talked about it. They've said, yeah, that'd be great. We should really do that. I suspect that might be kind of a, yeah, guys, we get it. It is awesome. And either we're definitely doing that. That sounds sweet. Or just expectations in check. So I'm thinking of it both ways. The underground, I hope it does return in some capacity for Division 2. I know a lot of people don't like it. I still enjoy it for just mowing through and testing out new builds, and the hunter fights can be fun. I particularly run a tactician build and enjoy running underground solo. Because of that, the slightly reduced firearms I have and health, they can be somewhat challenging, especially when you're facing two at once. And just more variety, more, things to do, not just going through and mowing things down, not just defending the generator every time. Give us maybe a little more than that, and then up the challenge a bit. I would like, like a legendary type of underground mode, even a resistance type underground where it's literally endless and it just gets harder and harder and harder every room that you go into until you either die or end up running out of time to play. And then I have kind of like an other category. Things like convoy attacks would be so cool. One missed opportunity, and I'm sure there's a lot behind it. But, like the cleaners had these really cool, like militarized dump trucks and garbage trucks that we see everywhere, especially in the West Side Piers. We see these extremely, like armored trucks and stuff like that. That would have been so perfect to fight. Think about like running through doing your LZ bosses, and then a random event starts where 2 or 3 of those trucks pull up and a bunch of cleaners jump off of them, and you need to like stop that convoy or wipe out the convoy and blow up the vehicles so they don't have them anymore. Even missions where you would go like HVT type missions where you would go and blow up like a place where they're making those trucks, or they're a fuel depot, things like that. I would love to see something like that. Base defense situations where whatever our boo is, or our safe houses, or these civilian camps, give us the opportunity to go and defend those. Maybe you give us some extra rewards or give us some kind of incentive. Things like bounties would be really neat, where it could just be a random thing that pops up, maybe similar to an HVT, where you go and you have to find a specific enemy. We had some of this in the side missions at the beginning of the game, where you would go through these waves of enemies in these cool parts of the map, but then they just disappeared. And maybe even have bounties on us. If you're really giving it to one of the factions and you're, really focusing on them on missions, you get a bounty put on your head and you get some elite soldiers or elite units from that faction that come after you. And it could happen anywhere. And then one thing I really want is obviously hunters back. Come on, I'm not even going to explain that. I've talked a ton about them. But I want if there's world tiers again, I want a impossible world tier. I wish in the current game there was like a level, there's a world tier 6 that didn't give better rewards, but actually just gave a ton of cool cosmetics of all types. Whether it's clothing or skins. And I would want it to be where all the enemies are like level 36 or 37, whether it's in the DZ or whether it's in the LZ, all the missions, everything. Where it would be really hard, if not impossible, for the average player to earn these things. But if you could, how cool would it be to show off cosmetics and people could see, holy crap, that guy was able to plow through some of the hardest content in this game, and look at all that crazy stuff they have to show us. When it comes to like the gunplay and gun meta, I think I've talked more about that in the PvP, but just more useful guns. Make every gun useful in some capacity. In PvE, it's a little more that way already, but it could still be better. The lower time to kill is something I think everyone's been asking for. If you combine the more interesting or mechanical AI, then I think it's okay to lower time to kill because it's still a challenge. When it comes to gear balance and things like that, again, this is kind of a PvP talk as well. But, give us some interesting gear talents and stuff like that rather than just DPS, Striker, to me, really, it's not that interesting of a set. It's just hit lots of shots, do lots of damage. We have some other sets like Firecrest and stuff that are kind of neat, but they're still like damage based. I'd really like to see maybe some other types of gear talents and stuff like that to be able to play with. And obviously, the separate stats for PvP and PvE can be the same gear. I don't think we need PvP sets and PvE sets. I think it can be in the same. It just needs to be able to not impact each other when they're balanced and things like that. The last and probably the most obvious things, network issues and stuff like that. There's so much to that. It has a lot to do with yourself as the user. It has a lot to do with the programming of the game, the servers, all that stuff. It's just a general, let's just make it a little better. I don't know what that means. I'm a layman. Maybe that's a silly thing to say, but it can't hurt. But the biggest thing, and me saving this to the very end, is probably something that's going to drive some people nuts. but the grenade stagger. I suspect that's a Division 1 related bug. If I remember correctly, there was actually a PTS week where it was fixed. It didn't happen, but I'm guessing it's connected to something that causes more issues when it's gone than when it's there. And I have a strong suggestion. I see so many people say that they can't fix it, or that they don't know how to, or that they won't, or that they aren't even aware of it. I can promise you that's not the case, but I can also guess that there's a pretty reasonable but maybe also annoying reason why the grenade stagger still exists. That's what I'm hoping for PvE. I really think it's going to be a ton of fun. I'm sure we've only seen the very tip of the iceberg at this point. I can't wait to see. I'm sure all these things will be addressed in one way or the other, and there's probably 1,000 things that we're going to see that I never even could have thought of. That's what I have for you this video. Check me out on Twitter, Twitch, as Baundiesel. Check me out on Instagram as Baundiesel_Twitch. You can look for the EchoCast on Anchor, iTunes, and SoundCloud. And that's it. That's what I have for you. This was Baundiesel, and until next time.